Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Football Show with myself, Tim Benz, and Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News here at Trib Live on the Trib Live Facebook live stream and the Trib Sports YouTube channel. Glad you're with us as we are brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore. Try one of their 500 available craft beers, grab some food, including the fabulous steak on a stone, and watch Pittsburgh sports all year long on one of their many TVs directly across from PNC Park at the end of the Clemente Bridge. Meet me at Mike's. I go to Mike's all the time. It's my favorite place on the North Shore every time I go to a Pirates game. And actually, if I had gone last night, I would have enjoyed myself because Paul Skeens was pitching, and he was phenomenal yet again. Who knows, from time to time, we might even go down the path of college basketball where Mike is an expert, baseball as well. But we are dedicated every Friday at 9 a.m. to football. We will definitely wander into the college ranks once they get going, but primarily we're going to focus on the Steelers in advance of every one of their games all the way through the end of the regular season. Mike, it's great to have you on board for this. 25 years coming up at the Sporting News. Congratulations on that. Great that you remember us here in Pittsburgh. Glad that you're back in Pittsburgh. And I'm real happy that you've kept all of your Pittsburgh ties throughout all of your national success. It's good to have you here on a Pittsburgh platform with us here at the Trib.
Yeah, not only a Pittsburgh platform, Tim, but where I started. The Trib is where I had my internship, my first journalism internship, and became full-time a year later. So it's very interesting to be back where it all began and to be talking about a team in the Steelers that sort of defined my teenage years. They won 4 Super Bowls in the 70s when I was a teenager, and we've watched that organization continue to thrive in the half century since. So it's been pretty amazing to watch, and it'll be really exciting to talk about what is a season unlike any that I can remember, bringing in someone like Aaron Rodgers to quarterback the team, making a lot of dramatic moves that has not been their way through any of that half century that I talked about. So we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about as the games progress.
Well, we'll use that as a segue into our first segment. It's called The View from Mount Washington, the 30,000-foot big picture view, the state of the Steelers heading into game day. And I've got a thought, but I want to pick up on one that you just gave me right there. So I'm going to get divergent from our rundown right off the bat here, Mike, because you got me thinking. I actually think they have started to go down that path more often. I think they have started to become a team in the past 5 years or so, maybe starting with the end of the Kevin Colbert era and certainly segueing into the Omar Khan era, where they are a bit more aggressive. They are more like the rest of the league in the offseason. They are willing to shake things up and try new things. And it's kind of been by force because of the Ben Roethlisberger retirement. When you're constantly trying to figure out who your quarterback is going to be, that's going to lead to a ton of different permutations and calculations about how you're going to approach the season because, well, you don't have one under contract and you kind of don't know where you're going big picture either. So the Steelers, I think, have been benefit and victim of both circumstances at the same time.
I would agree with that they have done some things a little bit differently, but can you remember the Steelers trading away a core piece like Minkah Fitzpatrick for another a couple of special players in Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey? That is a totally different step for them. I can't remember them trading away someone that they liked, and they never fell out of at least with Minkah Fitzpatrick. He was a productive player for them, a consistent Pro Bowl player at his best, and probably I still think it had more to do with how he was deployed when he was at his best than necessarily him falling off in the last year or two. But they were happy with him, and they said, yeah, but we'll be happier with these two guys. And they made the move. So that to me is a different step for the Pittsburgh Steelers than any that they've made in a very long time. And I'm very curious to see how it turns out. Ramsey has gotten rave reviews at camp. Jonnu, not as much to this point. They're still trying to work out how they want to deploy the tight ends, what they want to do with them, who's going to play where, who's going to start, how many times are they going to use multiple tight end formations, how many times are they going to use 3 tight end formations, given the presence of Freiermuth and Washington. So I think it's really an interesting chapter for the Steelers. I don't think that it's necessarily going to define who they'll be for the next 5 years, but it certainly will have a huge impact on this year and probably 26 as well.
Well, I'm going to start off for this game anyway, since we're going to begin every week talking about where they are on a week-to-week basis. For this game to start the preseason, my thing that I'm watching for is, are the rookies going to be positive contributors, or are we going to have redshirt seasons like we saw from a couple of them last year? Now, one of them was forced because of injury in Troy Fautano. You could say the other one was kind of forced as well with Roman Wilson. It was with the ankle, but then I think it was a little slow to get up to speed once he got healthy from that. Then he got hurt again with the hamstring. There are places that need to be plugged by rookie players, and I think we know where they are. They drafted Derek Harmon to be a starter. He got that tab right out of the gates day one of OTAs. Caleb Johnson, not just replacing Najee Harris, but hopefully to take that running back position to another step beyond that. You know, Jack Sawyer can probably incubate behind TJ Watt before he has to be an every down contributor. I don't even know if they have that in their mind. I think they just kind of want to see him be what DeMarvin Leal never was, at least not until this point. So, you know, and Will Howard that we'll get to in a little bit, but specifically with Harmon and probably with Y.A. Black, who has had a really good camp so far, has opened a lot of people's eyes. He's not the Project Dan McCullers, just big, hulking guy that you throw into the middle of the field that a lot of people were anticipating. I think they're going to get useful snaps out of him quite a lot. That's what I want to see in this game. How far along is Johnson really? How far along is Harmon really? And can Black contribute along that defensive line and help where things really lagged in the run game last year?
Yeah, Harmon is such an enormous part of this team immediately because it was such a weakness last year. They decided to move on from Ogunjobi probably at least a year too late, even though they didn't necessarily have the opportunity to select a defensive tackle last year because they were working on trying to replace and repair the offensive line. But even with that being the case, they weren't able to draft at the defensive tackle position a year ago. They still probably held on to Ogunjobi a year too long. I mean, the left side of the Steelers' defensive line, the right side of too many opponents' offensive lines. It was a one-way street way too often, and certainly in the playoff game against the Ravens, that was problematic. I'm very interested to see how Harmon does. Just getting started now, but when we start getting to real games, he's going to have to be ready to be an impactful player. I don't know. No defensive lineman is playing every down any longer. I mean, Cam every now and then, Cam Hayward will take his time off. You'll certainly see that with Keanu Benton. And, of course, they'll go down to 2 defensive linemen on many occasions, if not the majority of occasions. But Harmon has to be a regular player and a regular contributor, a regular force, if you will, or this defense will not be successful at the level that everyone seems to believe, based on camp performance and on paper, they can be capable of delivering.
What's your big picture outlook for this game?
Yeah, for me, it's the other side of the line, and I'm looking at Broderick Jones, and not because I'm concerned necessarily. I mean, there has to be progress, no doubt. But in modern Steelers football, there has to be a crisis. That someone has to be the crisis. A year ago, it was the fact they didn't have a second wide receiver, and now it's Broderick Jones for now during training camp. And there's not much he can do. I suppose he could go out and start tearing guys up, and people will shut this conversation down. But then they'll say still. That they want to see it in a regular season game. Broderick Jones has been an NFL left tackle for about 15 minutes. And that's not much of an exaggeration. And because of the fact that he was injured at the start of camp, his experience there is highly limited. And I'm not worried about that. And I'm also not one who's in such a hurry to put him in the bust pile. He's played 2 years. He played one really good year as a rookie at right tackle, and he played one pretty bad year as a second-year player at right tackle. But I want to see what he does at this position And I know that they need good backups there. And I know that that there's no guarantee he's going to deliver. But when they scouted him, they believed in him. They invested heavily in him, not only a 1 pick, but also some draft capital to move up to make that selection. So let's see how it goes before we decide that he's already broken.
Well, I'm going to use that as my launching point to get to our next topic of conversation, and that's our keys to victory. And my first key to victory, if we do one offense, defense, and do one bonus key, as I like to do when I was doing the Steelers pregame show, it's usually one that I'll get to on special teams, but if I can avoid it and do something else, I'll certainly do that too. Offensively, though, it's keep Mason Rudolph upright, and that's got to come from the 2 tackles. It's sort of a precursor of what I think we're going to talk about a lot with Aaron Rodgers once he starts to play. You got Mason Rudolph, who is, I think, a dependable at this point backup. That's going to be his lot in life. That's who he is, I think, at this stage of his career. But it's no small thing to have your backup quarterback healthy. We've seen the Steelers at times, run into that problem, especially when Roethlisberger was the quarterback, where they had to mill around and try to find guys in the fly to be a number 2. They went to their number 2 quite a bit. We saw what happened when they got down to Duck Hodges, for crying out loud, when Ben blew out his elbow in 2019. So keep Rudolph upright, because I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to make it through the whole season. And I do like Howard, but I'm not ready to turn the keys over to him. And he's hurt right now, too. You don't know how long it's going to be before he comes back. And if he doesn't have the preseason with the busted hand, that changes an entire talking point. So just keep Mason Rudolph upright against a Jags team, which, by the way, has some edge rushers that are a concern. And they are playing everybody, from what Liam Cohen says.
Yeah, I totally see your point on that. And especially with the fact that that you have Will Howard injured now. Mason's probably going to play more than was originally intended in this game. And Howard is going to lose a lot of development time by not being able to participate in training camp, essentially, theoretically, for the rest of camp. But I don't know whether he makes it back before the first game or not. But he loses a lot of development time, and that is hard to get back. So you need Mason to be healthy through the course of the year to expect to be to be comfortable about being successful in 2025. My key. Remember, this is not the key to winning the game, because
no, this is a preseason. This is just the key that you want to see. This is
no one cares if they win the game unless you happen to be unwise enough to bet on it. But for me, I want to see Roman Wilson look like an NFL wide receiver. And I'm not saying he hasn't to date, because he hasn't really been on the field at all. He missed all of the exhibition season last year. I think it was the Raiders game, if I remember correctly, that he was actually active and played like 5 snaps. So we haven't seen anything from him. And he was a 3rd-round pick, caught 48 passes for a national championship team. 12 of them went for touchdowns. He was a very important player for Michigan in 2023 and became an important draft pick for the Steelers. So I'm not saying that it's his fault that he hasn't made an impact yet. That injuries happen in football. But it would be nice to see him make an impact and start with that in the exhibition season. And obviously that begins down in Jacksonville.
My defensive key is Derek Harmon better look like a first-round pick, because it's just necessary. And I don't know, for all the years that I've covered the Steelers, going back to 2001 now, I don't know if I've come across a first-round pick who's been talking about or spoken to as infrequently as Derek Harmon. There have been so many other things to talk about, and he plays a position, especially in training camp, of relative anonymity, aside from the moments where they're playing goal line, or, they're in the middle of the 7 shots thing on occasion, where he might have a snap or 2, but even those are usually quick throws, and you're not having a lot of time for the defensive lineman to make a real push up the middle. Maybe he bats a pass like Black has done on a few occasions, but there just hasn't been a lot of talk about his development. I think he's going to be good. I think he's going to be fine. Hopefully he's better than that. Maybe we see a grain or 2 of sand in that regard tonight.
I loved his tape coming out of Oregon. When it became apparent that he was going to be one of the players that the Steelers targeted, I watched a lot of his highlight tape and loved him. So very excited to see him. For me, I suppose some of this is going to be the secondary. Some of it's going to be hard to really recognize, because they're not going to show everything, the whole package and the variety of looks. But I just want to see where everybody lines up, because you have 3 starting cornerbacks, and hey, that's an all-time record for the Steelers because they're up at a lot of years when they didn't have 2 starting cornerbacks. Now they have 3. So what do you do with all those guys? I am very curious to see where Slay and Porter and, of course, Ramsey, where those guys line up, what they do with them. They're certainly on multiple wide receiver formations, long obvious passing downs. They're all going to be out there, and they're all going to be somewhere. And I suppose it'll most likely be Ramsey in the slot because of his physicality. But it is interesting to see what becomes of those 3 guys and the players behind him. And of course, we know because of the Mika trade we addressed earlier, that in that circumstance, they have to make sure that either Thornhill or whoever else they want to put in that free safety position is sufficient. And so we'll see a lot about that, or at least get some hints about that in game 1 of the exhibition season.
My bonus key is who wins the great Pittsburgh punt off. Who would have thought, Mike? There's depth at punter. It's the deepest position in Pittsburgh sports right now. They got 2 guys who could be starters anywhere, I think, right now. They both had good camps. They're both capable holders. People talk about that angle. I think Boswell is holder proof at this point. He's been through so many guys. I don't think that really affects him. It's just whoever the better guy is in the preseason at this point. And is Johnston healthy enough to move around and protect himself after that knee injury? But I don't think they can go wrong. I can't believe I'm saying this. The Steelers can't go wrong at punter. Either one is good. So I want to see who wins that if I'm looking for a bonus angle. How about you?
Yeah, and I like that. And I do think that if they both kick well, they might be able to get, I mean, right now, I think they're sitting on 13 draft picks in the 2026 draft. They might be able to get a 14th pick. It'd probably be a 7th rounder or something like that. But I think that's a very interesting element to look at, the fact that they have 2 NFL level punters, and not just guys who are okay or passable, but 2 guys who have had brilliant seasons at that position. So that will be fascinating to watch.
You got a bonus one for me?
Well, I think the bonus one, if you're going to look at what happens with Mason Rudolph, what happens behind him? How much does he play? I think that's a fascinating thing, because with Howard gone, you really lose a lot of what your plan was for the preseason. You were expecting Howard to play half of the games, if not more. And so where do you find the quarterback reps? And does Mason end up having to play more than he or they imagined? I think that's probably the thing that I'll be watching maybe most heavily, is how much football he plays, and how deep do you want to go with him? Do you want him playing behind the 3rd offensive line? I'm not sure that I'd want him taking too many of those reps.
Yeah, we're worried about some offensive linemen on the first team. The 3rd team is a real concern. That's almost always been the case when you get down to the depths of the offensive line. But I do want to hear from other people too. If you're watching out there, you can comment. You can comment on Facebook. You can comment on YouTube. We'll get some comments at the end of the show. I've had a bunch throughout the course of the week. You can also tweet me at Tim Benz PGH, and I'll save up your comments for the Friday Football Show, brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore. Now we'll get to the other sideline as we look at what the Jaguars are doing or not doing. And in this case, for the preseason, they're doing a lot. I am interested to see what the Jags do, particularly with Travis Hunter. Is this thing going to work or not, Mike? Do you think, with him playing wide receiver and cornerback? It was interesting for me to read. I don't know how much of this you picked up on, but just because I was doing some Jags advance work here, some of the stories that were coming out of Jacksonville about how it's been, they think, harder for him in training camp and in the scrimmages because he's had to change his jersey in between reps. And they're not going to have to worry about that during real games. Like, if he's scrimmaging, if he goes from one side to the other, they actually might have lost a rep or two or haven't been able to communicate with the coaches because he's getting his jersey off and putting it back on. You see this when you go to college football games. I see this when I'm doing Duquesne games. The double number thing comes up in college. It doesn't come up in the NFL. One thing I did read from a Jaguars reporter was, to that end, there's a little bit of a concern that on the sidelines, if they're making in-game adjustments and they figured out something about the defense they want to try in the next drive, and he goes right back out there and plays again at nickel or something like that for the defense, he's going to have to get rebriefed during a TV timeout or something like that. There's going to be really no time for him just to get his mind clear, get an extra drink of water, allow things to assimilate. He's always either going to be playing or being spoken to by a coach. And that is a nuance, but it is an interesting one that I guess I hadn't considered very much. He got through it in Colorado. Maybe it's a different animal when he gets to the NFL, though.
It's totally different, Tim, and I don't see the value. I really don't. I don't see. We look at players, and we mentioned this earlier about Cam Hayward is not going to play every play, and of course T.J. Watt, the best defensive player in the league over the last half dozen years, he doesn't play every play. He doesn't play every important play. There are lots of times when the Steelers need a stop, and you're saying, okay, TJ's not out there, and no one's blaming him for that. The playing at this level in this sport is exhausting. Mm-hmm. And you want to be as fresh as possible, to be as close to the top of your game as possible. And look, I'm not saying that it wouldn't make sense for in a big situation. If you, and this, it depends on which side of the ball you decide he is best at. But let's say you decide his best side of the ball, the most valuable to your team, is a wide receiver, giving Lawrence a target.
And okay, he's lobbying for him to be full-time offense. He made that comment too.
Yeah, well, that means that he likes him, and that's good for the Jags. But the question is, when you put him on the defensive side on a relatively full-time basis, then he's less a defensive player than he can be. Or if you put him on the offensive side, and when I say that, I'm saying at both sides. You're putting on both sides of the ball on a relatively full-time basis, then he's going to be a lesser defensive player than he ordinarily would be, and a lesser offensive player. And lesser players aren't what you're looking for in the NFL. You need the very best of whoever's out there. And so I think that trying to put him in both circumstances is a massive error by the Jags. Now, like I said, if you decide he's a full-time wideout, and then you want to put him out on a big possession because you think he's a great cover guy, and you just want to say, go get that guy, go get Justin Jefferson, and don't let him move on this, on this particular possession. Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense to me. But full-time or close to full-time on both sides of the ball, I think is a waste of the number 2 overall pick, and I think it's a massive error. And I'll be curious to see how long this experiment lasts.
All right, so Steelers fans who are watching, you can put your comments to us. Chris will put them up on the screen when we get to our comments section. I just want to know who you're most interested in watching. I want to know how curious you are about the rookies. I want to know how curious you are about where Mason Rudolph is coming back. I want to know what you think about some of the defensive depth, a lot of which we will see. I don't mind arguing or debating what we just talked about with Travis Hunter. How about you, Mike? Did you have something specific about the Jags you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, for me, it's just the overall coaching situation. They were in a heck of a hurry to bring in Liam Cohen from Tampa Bay. And I look at this as the continuation of a trend that started nearly a decade ago with Sean McVay. Now, Sean McVay was a heck of a hire. 30 years old. The Rams put him in position as their head coach. They immediately win double-digit games, and then a year after that, they make the Super Bowl, and not long after that, they return to the Super Bowl and win it. Sean McVay, great hire. But all the copycat hires, and I knew when McVay had the success that he had, that attractive package, young, bright, and all of that, that was going to be what a lot of teams that had NFL head coach openings were going to pursue. Mm-hmm. What I call somewhat derisively the boy genius. And it has not been successful. It has not been a successful trend. You look at Mike McDaniel, who so many people thought was the next genius. He's 28-25 since he was hired by the Dolphins. Shane Steichen at the Colts, at 500 record in a couple of years. Zach Taylor, 6 games under 500. Kevin Stefanski, 4 games under 500. Now that may be good for the Browns, but still not a dramatic success. Yeah. And if you look on the other side of the ball, Brandon Staley, who was kind of the defensive version of Sean McVay, he was fired after 3 years, I believe. So you're looking at a fairly unsuccessful trend that hasn't been abandoned yet. Liam Cohen had one great year as an NFL offensive coordinator. This past year with the Tampa Bay Bucks, he was terrific. He had a great year before that as Kentucky's offensive coordinator. Year before that, His team was 27th in the league in scoring with the Rams as the OC there. So they decided that was enough to make him a head coach. I just wonder about this trend and the belief that if you can put together a high-level offense with the head coach who's oriented that way, that everything else will take care of itself. It doesn't. There are three sides to the football, so to speak.
Right.
Offense, defense, special teams, and they all have significant importance. And defense is at least as important as offense. I know offense drives it. If you've got someone like Patrick Mahomes, it drives it. But hey, Joe Burrow had a great year in 2024, and the Bengals did not make the playoffs because their defense was a disaster. So it does matter what happens on both sides of the ball.
Okay, let's get to our stat pack. This is the most telling stat heading into this game, and it's not going to be just one. I'm sure we're going to load up on a bunch of these throughout the course of the year once more data rolls in, and once we have games from the week before to look at and more from the opponent to look at. But this might dovetail with sort of a bigger picture discussion like we were having before. And as we were kicking around, we were in the green room, so to speak, the theoretical virtual digital green room. This is where Mike and I are probably going to get divergent a lot when it comes to our opinions about the Steelers. And it's, this run of post Super Bowl Mike Tomlin era where they've only had 3 playoff victories since the trip to the Super Bowl where they lost to Green Bay, as opposed to the success of his early years. Comp that to what other teams across the National Football League have done. And as everybody loves to say, well, any other team in the world would love to be over 500 every year. But we've seen a lot of teams pop up that have had at least 1 playoff victory over the last 8 years, or can boast more than 3 playoff victories over the last 14, which is where the Steelers have been. And I don't know about you, Mike. I think you and I have talked about this because we're both old enough to have lived through this era. And that is the post Bradshaw, Harris, Swan, Steel Curtain era Steelers, and how they lost their way, got old, aged out, kind of like what we're seeing with the Penguins right now, to be honest, up until Cowher got hired and turned things around very quickly in 1992. A lot of people who will defend the way things have gone here in Pittsburgh by saying at least they've been relevant every year, at least they've been competitive every year, at least they made a playoff push every year, will say it's not like the 80s, it's not like the 80s, it's not like the 80s, it's never like it was back in the mid-80s at the end of the Noel regime. Well, here we are. This is the stat that I came across, and I kind of cooked it up myself. Something just kind of sparked my mind to look it up, but here it is. Since Super Bowl 14, so if you go from 1980 to 1995, when they made the Super Bowl and lost to the Cowboys. So 1980 to 1995 versus 2010 to 2025. 2 15-year stretches, all right? The one we're currently in versus the desert that was the 1980s. The Steelers actually had more playoff victories in that stretch in the 80s than they have in this one. It's been 3 playoff games. 1 in 1 year, that was 2015, 2 in 2016 before they lost the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. 1980 to 1995, the Steelers actually had 1 more because they had 2 in 1994. They had the upset win in Denver over Elway, and in 1989, they had the upset win in the Astrodome on the Gary Anderson field goal to beat the Oilers. So, and the reason I kind of bring this out in a more big picture is the way I remember the 80s as a fan, long before I was doing this, just watching them be mediocre, at times sub-mediocre. Yeah, I hated it. It felt like crap. But the way that they've gone through some of these seasons, especially lately, especially I would say from 2018 on, where they're either dramatically bad in the beginning of the year and they feel like they've baked your hopes before you even get to October, or they collapse at the end of the year like they did last year, or sometimes like 2018 where they did both and they were 1-2-1 and looked terrible at the start of the year, and then went from 7-2-1 to out of the playoffs and finishing 9-6-1. The way that they put you through these seasons of late, the taxation of a fan base that has gone through these last 8 years, I don't think is all that dissimilar from just not being all that good as they were in the 80s. And remember, like those playoff stats that I gave you, there weren't 7 teams making the playoffs. There were 4 and then 5 eventually. But, it wasn't – right now it's not that big of a deal to make the playoffs. There's 16 teams in each conference. There's 7 playoff spots. Back then it was 4 or 5 teams got in and there was only 3 divisions. So it was a lot tougher to make, and they still managed to come across 4 playoff victories.
Well, I think you make a very compelling case that the last 8 years have not been sensational, and they haven't been. But I think if you look at that whole, you brought up that post Green Bay Super Bowl, so from 2011 on, and I think what's often overlooked, I see a lot especially on Twitter, about that era, that decade. What they didn't do anything with the killer bees. I mean, that's a common comment. I'm sure you've seen it a ton of times.
Oh yeah.
And the problem is that but in a lot of those games, there weren't bees. There was just a bee. That Le'Veon Bell, 3 consecutive seasons, 14, 15, 16, did not finish the last playoff game. Was absent in almost the entire New England game in 2016 in the AFC Championship game. Didn't play at all in the playoffs in 15 or 14, and got hurt in the final regular season game in 14. And they just didn't have any answer beyond him. And of course, in the 15 season, the 16 playoffs, D'Angelo Alexander had also been hurt that year. So they went into the playoffs they were down to their 3rd string running back, Fitz Toussaint, and they were on the road beating the eventual Super Bowl champions until Fitz Toussaint fumbled on what would have possibly been a clinching drive. So those injuries have really been problematic. And they have other teams had injuries? Yeah, sure. But to their absolute most vital players, Brown and Bell in 15, Bell in 14, 15, and 16, and then Ryan Shazier in 17. I think that's been a factor in that stretch. I think their playoff performances in the Cleveland game in 2020 was indefensible. It was pathetic in many ways. I thought last year was a little bit more defensible, a little bit more because Baltimore was significantly better than Cleveland in 2020. But they had a terrible defensive game plan in the Baltimore game. Just it was awful, and that's a big reason why eventually the momentum carried Baltimore to 299 rushing yards. Is that the original game plan was so poor that the Ravens got momentum, and then the Steelers lost hope, so to speak, and started to just yield. So I think that they have to do a better job coaching the playoffs when they get there, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the first thing that has to happen is, in order for them to be competitive in those games, they have to have a more proficient offense, and they haven't had one. Ben in 2020 was not Ben in 2017, and then of course you went into a playoff game with Mason Rudolph against a terrific Buffalo team, and then last year you had Russ, and Russ wasn't playing very well. But they have made mistakes along the way too. The decision to play the Bengals in the final week of last season in a defensive struggle because you were so afraid of Joe Burrow. Well, you had just put 45 points on that terrible defense 3 weeks earlier. Yeah. And now you decide that you need to concern yourselves first with making sure that Burrow doesn't touch the ball very often. One of the worst offensive game plans I've ever seen the Steelers put on the field, and they had Matt Canada for 2 years. So that's saying a lot. So they have to do better about positioning themselves as well. They didn't have to play Baltimore in round 1 last year. I don't know what would have happened if they'd gone to Houston, but they didn't have to play Baltimore. And playing Baltimore in that circumstance was among the worst matchups they could have had.
What's your stat?
Mine is 158.3. And that is
I know where you're going with this one. So
yeah, that is what is a perfect passer rating in the very convoluted system that the NFL has had for passer rating for many years. And that was what Kenny Pickett finished the 2023 preseason with, a perfect passer rating. And then we saw the regular season start, and we saw that Kenny Pickett was far from a perfect passer. And the reason I bring that up is just to remind everyone that what you're looking for in the preseason are individual things. Like I mentioned before, toward the start of the show, Roman Wilson looked like an NFL player. You mentioned as well the defensive line and making sure that looks good. That's what you're looking for in an exhibition season. Once you get to the fourth quarter, if it's winnable, would you rather see them win? Yeah, sure. It's always nicer to win. But it's really not about statistical performance or anything like that. It's really, and to use the language of the moment, it's kind of like a vibe. It's like you're looking for a team that's together, that's operational, functional. And if it looks good, great, but don't get too invested in it, because that 2023 preseason, a lot of people got excited about it. And I won't say that I wasn't one of them. I was never a Pickett believer, but I was a believer after that preseason. Well, maybe it won't be so bad. And it turned out, yeah, it was going to be that bad.
I want to, you just jogged my memory there with something. And our friend, I'm sure you've interacted quite a bit with, as have I, Gene Collier. If he does the Trite Trophy again, Vibes has to win it this year, because everything's a friggin' vibe. Everything, it doesn't matter what it is, it's a vibe. It's a picture, it's not a vibe. Okay, it's a song, it's not a vibe. Not everything is a vibe, but you're right. The Kenny Pickett thing was a vibe for a while. And by the way, not to jump ahead too much, but it looks like it's going to be Shadur Sanders. I know we're going to get that up soon in the segment where we do kind of across the league notes that we want to kick around. But yeah, I tend to agree with you, Mike, about how excited we get, how we sort of go into every preseason couching our expectations by saying it's only the preseason. And we're real good if something goes wrong at saying it's only the preseason afterwards. But Kenny looks the way that he does, and oh my God, they made the right pick. Our problems are solved. The post-Bradshaw, post-Ben thing, forget about it. This is the easiest segue ever. It's going to be Kenny taking over. It was just a couple years of muddling through. One mistake with Mitch Trubisky. That's where we all were after that preseason. And I bought into it a little bit too. I mean, I wasn't quite to that extreme, but he was making throws like in the first quarter of games against alleged starters for other teams that were, down the sideline to Pickens in tight coverage and putting the ball perfectly up where Pickens could only get it. And you thought, all right, this is going to be it. And it just never came to pass. And maybe part of that, not maybe, a lot of that, I'm sure, was the coaching, was Canada. But it's not like other teams were clamoring for him. And it's not like when he's become available, people have fallen all over themselves to get him and change their quarterback situation to make him the starter.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be the next Sam Darnold, Tim. I don't think that's out there for him.
No, that's you're right. That's the example that people use to try to sort of hold on to hope that he's going to be something. That's the example that people use to say, okay, the door's not shut on Kenny. Look at Sam Darnold. But, let's see how Sam Darnold is now in his next stop, too. Like, maybe that was just a brief flash in the pan. Like, Flacco had an awakening. Vinny Testaverde had an awakening at one point in his career. It happens. But all right, so let's move on then back to the Steelers specifically of today, the Steelers specifically of this game. It's time for Who Will Take Flight. Every night, Monday night, I should say, every Monday night at Mike's, it's flight night. Every time I go to Mike's, I love to get a flight, like to sample all their different craft beers. 500 craft beers available at their location on the North Shore, across the street from the Clemente statue, across the street from PNC Park. Be there for every game day. You can be there for football games, for Pitt, for the Steelers, for the Penguins, all the concerts on the North Shore. Mike's Beer Bar, right at the base of the Clemente Bridge. I'm going to say Caleb Johnson. I'll go with one of each, all right? I'll say Travis Hunter, who we've talked about already, because I do think this is going to work because he's that good of an athlete, at least for the short term, at least for, in the immediacy where people can't take advantage of it, like you outlined before, Mike. But Caleb Johnson, to me, on the Steelers side, is the guy that I'm going to watch the most, because he was, I think, the story of the first 3 days of camp. Then they started to hit. Then they started to tackle. Then the stakes went up. Then the pads went on, and it's been more of a challenge for him. I'm not going to say that my opinion has completely changed, because I loved the pick when it happened. That'd be way too wishy-washy. I still think he's going to be a good player. I still like the pick a lot. But when he hit a hole and took off in the first couple of days, you're like, oh, that's what second-level speed looks like. He's built a lot different than Najee. He's got little bit thinner. I don't want to say spindly by any stretch, but he's got longer legs. He's not a brick like Najee was, with like the punishing thighs and that sort of thing like Derrick Henry. He's a longer strider than what Najee was, which gives him a different gait and a different look to his breakaway speed. But there is something to the second level. Like once he gets a hole, he hits it. And once he hits the hole, there's a reward to it. There's a payoff. And that's what I don't think we got a lot of from Najee. I will say this, though, in defense of Najee and maybe to control some of the hype around Caleb Johnson. If you look at Najee's numbers from his rookie year, Najee had 1,600 yards from scrimmage as a rookie. So if you're talking about, like, if we're going to go position by position and look where the Steelers are better or worse, I did this exercise a couple times, once with Mark on the podcast and on Matt and Ben's Unfiltered. I put it in print too. If you go position by position with the Steelers, Mike, I think anywhere but safety, you can make the argument they're at least as good as, if not better than where they were last year. Safety, Minka goes in the trade. They're not as good at safety.
Right.
But I don't think there's a distinguishable, obvious position aside from that where you look at it and say they're worse there. Running back, everybody wants to assume they're better because Najee really got beat up on the way out the door by the fan base. And everybody loves the Caleb Johnson selection. But if you're going to be better there, then he's got to meet the numbers that Najee put up and then exceed them, right? Unless
not necessarily because he's not. Well, I mean, it depends on how the rotation goes. But he is not currently scheduled to be the one back. I mean, between the two of them, Jaylen Warren and his reserve, they need to combine for similar, if not better, numbers. But it doesn't necessarily have to be him.
No, but I'm saying if you think that he's going to be Najee, then he better give you at least 1,300 yards from scrimmage like he did last year. Because, you know, like, what do you think Jaylen Warren is going to be? Do you think Jaylen Warren this year is going to be much better than what he was? Because I think if you expose him as the number one running back, we're going to quickly figure out that he was probably best slotted to be a 1B. And then you are going to have to rely on Johnson being the much better player. Exactly
right, Tim. And that's part of why I was a believer that with the small price to pay, $7 million in an expanded cap, not punitive, I was a believer that they should have extended Najee. And I understand there were things that they didn't like about the way he played, that he wasn't great at hitting a hole that was brief. And too many of the Steelers' holes were brief, if at all. And also, he either by what they were telling him, we never really got a handle on this, whether they were telling him to go where the play said and not to reassess. You'd get frustrated by watching other NFL teams and say, okay, there was no hole there, so he went the other place. And Najee never did that, almost never. Did he say, okay, the play says here, but there's no hole. So instead of just running up there and taking the no gain, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to get a yard or 2 or 5 or 10 or whatever. He went where the hole was supposed to be. And if it wasn't there, it's your fault. And that was a problem. But I still felt like he ran hard. He was productive. He had 1,000 yards in every single one of his seasons. And so I wouldn't have been in a hurry to get out of the Najee Harris business. Partly because what you said, I'm not convinced Jaylen Warren is a 1A back. I think he's a phenomenal 1B back, but I'm not convinced he's a 1A back. And that's why that I wasn't in favor of moving in the direction that they did. Now they have, and we will see whether Caleb Johnson is the guy that can either completely supplant Najee and his production, or he can complement a Warren that exceeds what I suspect he is.
Yeah, I just think that, you know, some of the numbers that Najee did put up, and some of it, granted, was through pure volume. They do have to be met, and especially if they're going to lean into the run as much as they are. Maybe Caleb Johnson can get to the corner in that pitch play that they run all the time, and it never works. Maybe he can do it better than Najee, and that's where the yards come from. I don't know, but that's my hope. Who's your guy? Who takes flight this week?
I'm going to say YA Black for a couple of reasons. First of all, I got to get myself used to saying YA, because
just to say it out loud. Yeah, I've done it 1,000 times.
Yes, if you look at how his name spells out, you want to call him Yaya. Let's be honest. But why? And for those of us who are as old as I am, you think of YA Tittle. You think of YA Tittle, and it's easy to remember. See,
I thought you were going to go with the college basketball reference and say Yaya Ja, who I remember.
No, then I would. If I do that, then I'm back in making the error. So YA Black, partly because I got to train myself to get it right, but also because. In addition to Derek Harmon, who we know, like when the depth chart, the official depth chart came out earlier this week, there were some Steelers journalists, people who cover the Steelers I don't want to call them beat writers because they do so many things now, but some Steelers beat people, let's call it that, who were referring to the first depth chart as the veteran, the veteran commendation chart, but Derek Harmon went right on to the first team, no question. So, but YA Black is going to have to be an important player for them. They need good downs out of their backups on the defensive line instead of just passable. Oh, look, he didn't get completely trucked. He didn't get pancaked. No, that's not the standard. The standard is get a push him back, and if you can be disruptive with a pass breakup, a deflection, or get in the quarterback's face, all the better. But they need the backup defensive line to be able to be that sort of productive. And who knows, maybe even YA starts to push Keanu Benton, who we had such hopes for in his rookie year, and who maybe stagnated a little bit in his sophomore season. Maybe he either pushes Keanu to be better or at some point supplants him.
Let's go around the league right now. We'll get to our Around the League segment and remind you that Mike's Beer Bar has all the games each and every Sunday and Thursday night, Monday night, Sunday night, maybe on Christmas, Wednesday, whenever the hell they decide to play the games these days in the National Football League. Why don't you go first on this one, Mike? What do you have for some nuggets around the league?
Yeah, Friday night. This is the Friday football show, and Shedeur Sanders is going to open at quarterback for the Browns. I wrote a column about Shedeur and his circumstance for Sporting News that went up this morning, and I look at him as a fascinating character in this NFL preseason. There's not a lot to get super excited about, but it's hard not to be drawn into that drama because the Browns have been a train wreck at quarterback for nearly this entire century, going back to 2000 when Tim Couch was an early career player and a real talent, and they managed to screw that up. And so now they have, I was thinking about this as I was writing this column. They drafted two quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round and then Shedeur in the 5th round. And yet they'll probably be back in the same pool that the Steelers want to swim in next year at the 2026 draft here in Pittsburgh. It's hard to make as many mistakes at quarterback as the Browns have, but Shedeur has two opportunities. One, he can establish himself here because they got a couple of hurt guys there. Gabriel's not going to play. He's coming back from a hammy. Kenny Pickett's down with a hammy as well. They're not going to play Flacco in the preseason. They're going to play him as little as possible because he's already 40 years old. So this is kind of a showcase for Shedeur, either to grab a more prominent role on the Browns depth chart, or maybe to get himself the heck out of Cleveland because they can't keep 4 guys. I mean, if there's any team in football that would keep 4 quarterbacks,
it would be the Browns. Especially 4 quarterbacks, none of which might be any good.
Yes, exactly.
That'd be very Cleveland.
But one of those guys is going to either have to get traded or waived. So he might be able to put himself into a position where he might be a trade piece for the Browns. And so a lot to look forward to when they play at the Panthers on Friday evening.
All right, I got a couple here, and some of them are from games last night. These all involve teams the Steelers will face at some point during the course of the season. Rashawn Slater, out for the year, just became the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL and then suffered a torn patella tendon. That's a bad injury. He's done for the year for the Chargers. The Steelers play the Chargers on November the 9th. The week before that, they host the Indianapolis Colts, and Anthony Richardson hurt again. This time it was, I think it's a pinky injury like Will Howard, actually. He got hurt on a sack. He got hit, and hurt his hand. So we'll see how they navigate through that. They're pretty used to it at this point with him. And then I don't know if you saw the injury for that Baltimore cornerback, the rookie corner. Oh, my God, it was so bad. He tore his ACL. I think he tore his MCL too. Oh, wow. Some fan had a video of it from the end zone. He was trying to make a play, breaking up a pass in the end zone, and it was horrible. But so they've already lost a cornerback for the whole year. So those are some injuries that have come up already in week 1 of the preseason involving teams the Steelers will play. I'll talk about the Jets here a little bit because I want to see how Justin Fields does there. They're going to be like the Jaguars. They're going to play everybody, including Fields, who has had a really bumpy, from what I understand, based on reports that I've read and seen from New York, really bumpy start in New York, although I guess he was a little bit better yesterday. He is getting no help from his wide receivers. It's like a drop fest out there in New York, too. Like, and when you see Fields threw an interception in practice, Fields threw an interception in 7-on-7, it feels like 9 out of 10 of these interceptions are actually hitting the people in the hands, the pass catchers in the hands, and they're bouncing up and turning into interceptions. So some of it's skewed, but apparently he is having a rough adjustment there. You know, big picture on Fields, I wouldn't have given him $40 million either, but they were ready to give him something. And we've got Aaron Rodgers to watch for a whole season just because Fields said no. Just remember that when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks, too.
Yep. My feeling on Fields was always that you look at what the Eagles did and you do what they did with Jalen Hurts. So week 4 of last season, they threw their offense in the waste can, or at least they put it on a shelf till when they have a quarterback who was more likely to excel in it. And they developed an offense around what Jalen does well, which is throw to the first target. He's as good as anybody. He's got a great arm, good vision. But it was once the offense started to, we got to get the option 3. That's when he didn't excel, and that's when they didn't excel. And so they said, okay, no more of that. You get option 1, maybe option 2, and if you don't hit option 2 immediately, get on the roll. Either extend the play or get out of the pocket and run. And that's how you have to play Justin Fields. He's got a good enough arm to excel at that. He's the second best running quarterback in the NFL. I think we know who the first is. But if you try to turn him into a Tom Brady style quarterback who just has better legs, it's not going to work. And honestly, I don't know what the Jets' intention is. But that was always my thought here, was if you were going to stick with Justin, then you have to change the offense. I don't think they were all that interested in changing the offense for him. And I think that's a big part of why.
When I hear he's having trouble processing, he's holding on to the ball too long. He's been inaccurate. Like this is everything I saw in camp from him last year. And then he was actually a little bit better than I expected. Well, actually, I take that back. He was significantly better than I thought he was going to be last year, and he still wasn't significant, which is why I don't know if you can ever bank on him being a starter. Before we get to our predictions and some comments, Mike, because I've got some lined up from Twitter and from our viewers here, I do really quickly just want to get a thought from you on the Boswell and Hayward situations, the contractual situations. I'm sure people have heard by now that they both want new deals. Boswell, I can never tell if he's holding out or not because he's more on the Laurel Valley and Latrobe Memorial or whatever course that is, that he goes golfing at all the time as opposed to being in training camp. And that's probably a good thing because as we saw, the more he kicks himself into oblivion in practice, the worse he gets. They kind of figured out the best training regimen for him. So I wouldn't mess with it from that standpoint, but both of them are doing very little in training camp. They both want new deals. There's no doubt that they can make the easy argument that they're underpaid. Okay. But that's the point. At what point do the Steelers break precedent here and really set themselves up for more problems contractually? Because everybody wants a new deal. Apparently, we can no longer say that NFL contracts are a one-way street because no one wants to stay with their signed contract anymore in the NFL. Like Cam's got 2 years left. Boz has 2 years left. He's the lowest paid kicker in the division. He's the best kicker in the AFC at the very least, probably in all of football. Yes, he should get a better deal, but if you make an exception for the kicker, then who else are you going to make an exception for? It's going to be for everybody. And as far as Cam goes, like, where you are in your career. I'm not sure if you're supposed to be at the point now where you can just ask for a new contract every year so there could be a wall at the end of it that's going to be punitive to the team. Like, they didn't. Eventually, they hit that point with Ben, for crying out loud. Now, granted, Hayward's been better later in his career than Roethlisberger was the 2 years coming back from the elbow. I get it. And
Right.
when he signed the deal, he was coming off of a lesser year than what he normally has. But, maybe just to accept it's going to be year to year at this point. I mean, the rest of you disagree or no?
No. My position on Cam is one. Yeah, okay. So you're making less money than Chris Jones. Well, Chris Jones is what, 5 years younger than you? A, he's won Super Bowls. B, and C, why do you care what Chris Jones makes? And D, you signed this contract a year ago.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like now. I think what they're doing is, one, like, I don't care if Cam Hayward practices at all. Like, if I'm concerned about the Steelers, my concern is that Cam Hayward week 1 is on 2 good legs and has 2 healthy arms. I don't care about whether he practices. He knows how to play. He's been in the league for 15 years. So I'm not worried about that. But I do wonder why he signed this deal a year ago if he was going to be upset with it in 12 months. I don't understand that part of it. I do understand that the cap went up, and so the Steelers are under the cap, and so they probably have some money to spend. And wouldn't it be good to reward the great players you have rather than just let the money sit in the bank? I think there's a logic to that. And I didn't realize that Boz was the 4th highest paid kicker in the division.
Well, it was last year with Tucker.
Yeah.
I mean, Tucker's not there now, but
yeah. But I mean, goodness gracious, if that's the case, he is underpaid. And I would look at the possibility of extending him by a couple of years to get him more money now.
Yeah, because you could do it. He's 1% against your cap, and you could double his salary, and he'd be like 3%. So,
right.
It's
and don't forget, Tim, when you talk about precedent, when Antonio Brown signed the contract, the Mike Wallace runner-up contract, so to speak, and then became the best receiver in the league, he at that point was underpaid. At the point he signed it, it was like a nice deal, and then he became pretty dramatically underpaid. So the Steelers kept pushing money from the next year into the previous year, or the current year, I should say, and so that he was somewhat compensated at a level that other great wide receivers were, until they got to the point where he was close to the end, and then they gave him a new deal. So it's not without precedent for them to do that. But I don't, in particular Hayward's contract, I don't understand why he's upset if he signed this deal a year ago. He didn't have any leverage then, I realized, because he was coming off a poor year, but he technically doesn't have any leverage now because there's either retire or play. Yeah. And if you retire, you get nothing. And so I don't have a problem with them giving him more money, but I hope he doesn't allow it to get ugly.
Let's get some quick comments here before we run out of time and get some predictions too. Jay wants to know thoughts on Beanie Bishop. I think Beanie's going to get a pick tonight. That's one of my predictions, actually. Jay, you read my mind. Beanie gets a pick tonight for the Steelers. I think he's a little undervalued. I think there are bigger issues afoot than what Beanie could be. Eccles has made some nice plays. That Eccles had a great day at camp 2 days ago. He's a nice maneuverable piece. Maybe he looks more the part of an NFL quarterback. I think Beanie is one-dimensional. I think that's what bothers them about him. But hey, he picked off Aaron Rodgers twice, so he had a couple good plays in camp actually the other day too. I like Beanie maybe more than they're allowing themselves to like Beanie, and maybe I shouldn't like him so much. But I'm not going to be worried if he has to get out there and play the slot, even if he's a backup option.
Yeah, I don't want him to be out there too much because that means that, like I said, you're looking at 3 starting level cornerbacks. If Beanie's on the field too much, that means that maybe one of them isn't available. Although I'm sure there are rotations where he could come out, and the more third and 20s that they face, the more you'll see of Beanie, perhaps. And in that circumstance, I don't mind him at all because he's a good cover guy and he's a ball hawk. And when he gets to the ball, he's good at bringing it down.
This guy, James, says, I don't believe the Jets believe in Fields. Steelers would have been a great situation, a better situation after being in an offense 1 year and having the time to get comfortable. I love Fields and want to see him succeed. I don't know if it would have been better here, Mike. I mean, for and 2 to start as the starter last year. A lot of them were low-scoring games. I don't think they believed in Fields. I think they were going to try to talk themselves into thinking Fields was the answer because they didn't want to go down the rabbit hole they eventually did with Aaron Rodgers. And I wonder if that's why they didn't offer him more in the first place. They were going to offer him what they were comfortable with, and they weren't going to go above that because I think they were iffy on him too.
Yeah, I don't think that it was about money. I think it was about the idea that you had to coordinate to him. And I don't think they wanted to go in that direction. And if you're not willing to go in that direction, you're wasting your time with him because that's the quarterback he is. He's the second best running quarterback in the NFL. And that's got to be a primary component of what you do with him. And if it's not, then you're wasting your time with him. Yeah, he's got a gun, but the gun only shows up on first option.
Spicoli says about quarterbacks, they don't know what they want. This team has had a history of jerking QBs around. Any franchise, any talented young quarterback should avoid. Just like Mason was going to be Ben's successor, nobody in the Steelers organization knows how to develop a quarterback. They haven't had to do that at all during the Roethlisberger era. They probably should have made more of an emphasis with Mason if he was actually a number 1 round pick that they thought that they had. I don't know how you do that with Ben being the quarterback, but it was tough to develop him on the fly in the situation that they did when he got thrown in that Seahawks game in 2019. I know that. And he's managed to develop to be a better QB now. It just took a lot longer than expected or hoped.
Yeah, I don't buy the idea that – I mean, look, I don't know if anybody in the organization is good at that, but they haven't really had the opportunity. The guy who was in charge when Ben became a great quarterback is still in charge of the Steelers. How much Mike Tomlin had to do with Ben's progression, I just know he didn't get in the way. But he was not a great quarterback in 05 and 06 or even 04.
He was in the 05 playoffs.
At points in the 05 playoffs, he was terrific. But he wasn't a consistently great quarterback in 05. 06 he was not. It really started to manifest itself in 07, then he became genuinely great in the teens decade. So he was in charge of that, but I'm not saying he had a lot to do with it other than not getting in the way. But we haven't seen them work with any great young talented quarterback since. Mason's a guy. And I don't think they did anything to harm or accelerate his progression because I don't think he was ever going to be a top flight NFL starter. When they draft a quarterback in the first round next year, and they will, that's when we'll see what they're capable of doing with a quarterback. And I would hope that they have, by that time, some people in place that know how to work with those players.
Yeah, I was hoping that was going to be the case with Pickett when they did take a first rounder with him, even though maybe he wasn't a first round talent, but he didn't develop enough. And I think, the way he handled himself after Mason left and what they decided to do with Russ, that was definitely a contributing factor to him moving on. I'll get one more, Mike, and then we'll get to our predictions to get out of here. The next franchise QB and the next head coach isn't going to be who you think it should be. It doesn't work like that. It will be a surprise to everyone. I don't think Steelers fans will allow it to be a surprise because we talk everybody into being a superstar before we even see them, just like Will Howard. Like, if Will Howard is going to be the guy, it's not going to be a surprise anymore because we've already deemed him to be Tom Brady because he played at a Big Ten school and was picked in the 6th round, coincidentally. So I think it's a less fun preseason, clearly, if Will Howard doesn't play at all, and I still don't know if he is, despite Tomlin's optimism. It also changes entirely what the narrative could be all year going into next year, because if he's great in the preseason, we're going to talk ourselves into thinking he can handle it as the starter if he doesn't get on the field and spoil that for us between Mason and Aaron Rodgers this year, and then they draft a linebacker in the middle of the draft, and they let all the other quarterbacks go. I could see that happening, that they talk themselves into thinking he's the guy.
No, I could see Steelers fans talking themselves into
Steelers fans could too, and I wonder if they would as well.
I say they would, and then when, I don't know, whoever develops as one of the top 2-3 quarterbacks through the course of the season, and we won't know until they start throwing the football around at the college level, but whoever develops into that person, if there had been a Will Howard August, there would have been Steelers fans saying, "Oh, don't take that guy. Take a a defensive end or whatever, offside linebacker or whatever it might be. We don't need a quarterback. We got Will. But that for me, it was never going to be the case. I like the Howard pick. Get that in the 6th round. Heck yeah, every day. But do I expect that he will become an NFL starter? No. If it happens, it's one of those rare competitive miracles is what I call it. And I'm not anticipating that, but hey, Will is welcome to change my mind. He's just not going to get as many opportunities this month as we expected.
All right, so prediction time, and we're always going to do the score, and we're going to do one player prediction as well. I gave you my player prediction. I think Beanie gets a pick. I was going to say Steelers win 19-13 until I heard the Jaguars going to play everybody, including Lawrence. So I'll say Jaguars win 19-18.
Okay, well, that's interesting because I have the Jaguars with exactly 19 points as well, beating the Steelers 19-14. I think Howard not playing is as a detriment to their pursuit of victory. Right. I think if he'd played, I think they would have had more success in the second half, and I might have predicted a Steelers win. This being the case, I say no. But my prediction is that the first Steelers possession will convert 1 first down and then be a punt on the second down. That's my. It's not going to be a 3 and out. It's going to be a 2 series and out. I'm going to ride with that because I think somehow they'll squeeze out a first down on that first series, but they're not going to stay out there long.
And we will celebrate it like it was Antonio Brown's immaculate extension. All right, Mike, great first show. Appreciate it. Fantastic maiden voyage. Glad you were a part of it. Hopefully we will keep it going throughout the entire season. That is our goal, and hopefully you will be a part of it every single week. The Friday Football Show brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar on the North Shore. Meet me at Mike's and check out the pregame podcast that I will post tomorrow in advance of Steelers and Jaguars. Again, brought to you by Mike's Beer Bar.